I don't know why you think I need storytelling. That's just absolutely ridiculous. Why in the world would I tell stories unless I'm golfing with my buddies? I have heard that on more than one occasion. So you might ask yourself, what in the world does storytelling, or as I call it, StoryPower, have to do with executive leadership? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this episode of Leading Leaders. You might want to be engaged in this conversation. Be ready to type your comments.
Master the StoryPower method to captivate your audience, improve workplace culture, and 10x your fundraising.
Scan the QR code to book your first coaching call or visit StoryPowerCoach.com.
Master the StoryPower method.
Think storytelling's just for bedtime? Nah, it's the secret sauce for business magic. Stuck in a rut with bland pitches and yawning clients? Enter Boost Your Business with StoryPower. 6 weeks of epic storytelling training. It's like leveling up in a video game but for your career. Master the art of narrative and watch connections blossom like a viral TikTok. Simple, impactful, and game-changing. Ready to transform your biz vibes? Dive in now and make storytelling your superpower.
Subscribe now for access to our extensive media library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. Begin your personal growth plan at StoryPowerAcademy.com for leadership development and communication skills training.
I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, and I have to be honest and tell you, all of my executive leadership in all of my life amounts to leading about 250-ish people. Now, not all of them reported to me. In fact, I had a very unique role. I worked side by side with area directors when I was at a Fortune 50 company. None of those people reported directly to me, but the way they did their job was trained by me, was informed by me, was instructed by me, and I worked directly with their boss's boss's boss. At one point, I was only 3 away from the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. I think the last I looked, we were at about $9.2 billion. And I was 3 away from the CEO, meaning there were only 3 people between me and the CEO of that portion of the corporation. But I wasn't considered an executive leader. I wasn't considered an executive at all. I wasn't a C-level anything. I've run my own company on different occasions and different levels. I've had 50 people that reported either directly to me or just one person between us. I've run my own company from everything from budgeting to delivery. All of the above, my responsibility. I get it. I've also never held a title, except on the paper as required by law. If there's a incorporation, which ours is an S-corp, there has to be a president. You can't just put a goldfish in that spot. So my name gets stuck in that spot. So I am the president of an S-corp in the United States. I have been since 2003. That means me and the 8, 10, or 12 people who've wandered through here as employees, contractors, get it done kind of peoples over the past 20 years. That's it. That's the team. That's all of us. I don't have a team. I don't have a board. I don't have 900 employees. But I also know that I have people that have become my coaching clients over the period of the last 14 years now. And in that time frame, I've had physicians. I mean, like genuine 20, 25-year MD physicians and PhDs and THDs and MDivs and people with extremely high levels of education and people who held extremely high titles, CEOs, CFOs, NFL. And recently, when talking with a client, they said to me, I'm not exactly sure how to convey, now that I'm outside that corporate environment and working more as a consultant, exactly what it is that I do. I said, well, let's talk about your most recent job titles. And that's where the conversation came down to, well, I've held the title CIO and I've held the title CTO, and now in many corporations, that CTO, CIO role has been morphed a little bit because security has become a part of their responsibility, and so now they're called a CISO or a CISO. So they're Chief Information Security Officers. Well, that job has a different group of responsibilities than the CIO, who's mostly responsible for information, or the CTO, who's mostly responsible for technologies. And while you can see how they could be blended together like that, that title alone leaves a lot to be desired. When I ask which one suits you best as a description, the client answered both, all of them, and none of them. I said, well, what do you mean? Well, if you just took the typical corporate job description and you looked at the org chart and you said, based on the org chart, the CIO does these 15 tasks. They're responsible for these departments, for these people, for these budgets, for these accomplishments. And the CTO and the CIO and the CISO, they all have their own little job descriptions, their own little assignments, their accomplishments, their reporting departments, their budgets. And while at some point I have done all of those jobs, none of those jobs really describes what I am capable of today. And that was another aha moment when I helped them to understand that what StoryPower expects of you as a communicator is that you don't rely on the labels. Now, just go back a few episodes in May of 2026, and you're going to hear me talk about what Chase Hughes describes as the parasite of language. Here's the concept of the parasite of language in a nutshell. The idea that we, as humans who communicate, tend to use a label and presume that the meaning of that label explains everything we need to know. If we can call it a cup, then, well, everybody knows what a cup is, right? Wait, what if we called it a mug? Is it the same thing? Is a cup and a mug the same thing? I mean, if it's a red Solo cup, is it the same thing? If it's a cup, like we only use a cup of flour to make pancakes, is it still the same thing? I mean, language can be very ambiguous, right? That's the challenge with job titles. Is this a CISO or a CTO or a CIO? Who knows? Because in different parts of the country, it could be a coffee mug or a coffee cup. Right? Just gets a different label. It has the same function. It holds my coffee and sometimes keeps it warm. I recently got spoiled. My wife has an insulated cup, you know, like a Stanley, like this one that I keep my cold water in, for coffee. And my coffee actually stayed hot for like an hour. It was the coolest thing ever. Unfortunately, it's a short little stumpy cup like this, and it's pink. I guess she didn't want me to steal it. See how those labels all of a sudden, just the language, the parasitic language that gets involved in you, and it makes decisions for you. Well, how do you know? Well, because if I walked in and applied for a job with you and I said the most recent job that I held was a CBO, you'd be like, a what? A CBO. I mean, I just made it up. Chief Broadcast Officer. I do the podcast. It might be I'm a CPO, a C3PO. I do 3 podcasts. I'm C3PO. I'm the Chief 3 Podcast Officer. I mean, I can make up anything I want to, right? I can give you a label and make you presume that my label fits. I can call myself anything I want to because I am my boss, and there's nothing you can do about it. You could choose to agree with me or not. That's about as far as it goes. But see, when we run into that problem as an executive leader, people have this already carved out expectation of what a CTO is going to do, or has done, or is competent at, or is capable of. In fact, there's some language that I hear thrown around, and it's really kind of funny because, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call it modern language. It's linguistics, purely linguistics. Where people say, well, are you capable of doing X, Y, and Z? And I've recently had, I'll think of it in a moment, perhaps before this podcast is over, probably after the podcast is over. Somebody asked me, well, have you ever done X, Y, Z? And they threw a label on something. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then as they began to walk through the process of, well, you would have to do this, and then this, and then this, and then this, I realized I've done every step of that We just didn't put it under that umbrella. It didn't have that name when I was required to do it. In fact, I've done it 1,000 times since then. It's just kind of the course of business and life, the way that I do it, but I didn't know it had that name. And so if you'd ask me in the form of a resume or a quiz or a survey or a job application, can you do X? I'd be like, I don't know what X is. And then realize later, hey, yeah, I've actually done that. Yeah, I'm actually quite competent at that. I just didn't know it needed that label. I didn't know it had to be a ceramic mug, not just a regular old coffee cup. It seems ridiculous to ponder, but the truth is, when we fall back lazily on labels. I had someone also recently ask me, so you call yourself a coach. Are you an actual executive coach? What do you mean by that? Do you mean, am I someone who has coached executives? Well, yeah, I mean, you got to have a certain number of hours before you can be an executive coach. I don't know, does 14 years count? I mean, am I certified? Well, I was certified by John Maxwell. Dr. John Maxwell would be certainly competent and qualified to say, I see you as competent and qualified to carry on my legacy to do that thing. I coached the Dale Carnegie program for 5 years. I'm not certified under one particular national group of people, but they're not a board. You're not required to have a license if you're not practicing therapy. So define qualified, define certified, define executive. And someone actually recently told me I am an educated, certified, qualified executive coach. And I went, okay, I guess you're eminently certified, qualified, educated, and intelligent. I get it. Does that mean I have to pay you more? Or does that mean you can tie your shoes faster? I mean, I don't know exactly what it means. Is it just a linguistic label? And that becomes part of the challenge. Because on the one side, you have the presumption that if I use this nomenclature, this name, CIO, CTO, CISO, if I use that name, then anyone who hears that name must assume all of these other things are true. I have these long conversations with PhD researchers, with physicians, doctors, lawyers, and nurses. And I'm not kidding, long conversations. And there are many, many occasions that in our coaching calls, I will say something and they're like, that's mind-boggling to me. I've never even thought of it that way. In all of my education, in all of my study, and all of my practice, I've never pondered it like you just said it. It's actually quite brilliant. That really simplifies the concept. Okay, that's my gift, that connectedness, that number one learner, that futuristic, that strategic, all those things melded together. By the way, those are my top 5 in Strength Finders. Just another way that you can analyze the human behavior. Some people use the stars. I had a client recently tell me, I use a calendar. And if I know that according to the calendar, this day is not going to be a good day for me, I don't schedule big events with my clients. I don't take a chance that this day that looks like, according to the calendar, could be really bad for me. You're not going to get an appointment with me to do X, Y, and Z because I'm not taking that risk. Not for me and not for you. Now, personally, to me, that's right on the edge of a little bit of woo-woo. That's looking at my calendar and going, yeah, bad day to trim your toenails. I have a hard time with that. It's just not my personality. It's not my way of understanding the world. But I can tell you, there are certain personality types that you don't want being your accountant. And there are certain personality types that would be phenomenal as an accountant and an absolute disaster as your chief marketing officer. Oh, your budgets would be tight, and so would be the lips around your word-of-mouth advertising. No one would know who you are. You would have plenty of money in the bank, but only because it never got spent, not because new revenue was coming in. See, these personality types, these competencies, these things that I've actually done that worked, and the things that I've done that, well, that was an absolute mess. Those things are not often found in the label of a job description. So whether you call yourself an executive leader or an executive coach, or you call yourself chief cook and bottle wash, which I've heard that for a long time. All right, the label you slap on yourself really is for the convenience of others. It's about other people hearing that label and going, oh, I know what that means. And if it was such that that label, the meaning of that label and everything behind that label never changed, that would be a successful venture. Meaning you could slap that label on yourself. Several years back, there was a guy who actually, if I'm not mistaken, eventually had it tattooed on his chest. He got sick of the little "my name is" name tags. He'd slap one on, it would peel off, et cetera, et cetera. He finally just slapped one on, put his "hello, my name is" right there on his chest. The label became the greeting. It became the "hello, I am." And we kind of moved from that. I believe that was in the mid to late 80s, early 90s. This guy was all over the news for having his name tattooed on his chest. But it was just his name. It was just the label. And the presumption is that you know what I mean by the label. When I put that description at the end of my name, when I put that at the top of my resume, when I put it on my business card, that you know exactly what that means. And there are some cases where if you know, comes into play, right? Like the guy that has the tattoo of the two ace cards on his wrist, and everybody's like, whoa, you don't mess with those guys. Or the one that has the trident on their arm. We've got a local neighbor here in our business area. The name of his business is Trident. And he looks like a guy who could have been a SEALs team guy. And so when you know what a frogman is, you know what a frogman is. And when you see that trident, a lot of times you think there's a direct association there. It's not true of him. He used it because of Poseidon, because he's into mythology. Okay, not a bad thing. But see, there's this presumed meaning that goes along with that symbology. When I was in my 20s, I was in the fire department as an Air Force firefighter. And I drew the firefighter's logo on the back of my car with shoe polish. It's called the Maltese Cross. Not the shield or the badge, the Maltese Cross. And if you've ever seen an old-time fire badge or fire shield, you'll see the Maltese Cross in the middle of it. I drew that on the back of my car. And somebody pulled me over and told me it was a white supremacist logo. I'm like, because my car is white? Or because the shoe polish is white? Or because that has to do with the fire department. I mean, look at my badge, look at my uniform, look at my, that's this. But see, the symbolism, the symbology, the representation, what I mean for it to mean and what you think it means could be two totally different things, two polar opposite things. So just slapping a job description on myself, I've had this job, doesn't necessarily carry all the weight of the things that I've learned and done along the way. In fact, as my client moves from the role of CTO, CISO, CIO, and more into a consulting role, there are diverse skill sets that may never have been deployed while in those executive roles. Things that you learn along the way that actually earn your way from the working floor up to that role, that when you're in that role, they're no longer relevant. I mean, you don't do that anymore. You pay people to do that. But as a consultant, understanding both the budget and the practicality are crucial. And so a lot of people would look at someone who maybe came out of college, had a great job, or had a great education in business or logistics or whatever else, took that together with an MBA and worked their way right into the C-suite. But they've never actually done anything below the C-suite, hands-on, practical-wise. I don't mean they haven't accomplished anything. I simply mean they went from the educated path. See, this is the dilemma a lot of people have in the military. Now, I know handfuls of people. I say handful because when I say handful, I mean that I personally know, have had conversations with, have spent time with, who started off in the military in the enlisted ranks. They worked their way all the way up to the E4 Mafia, left as an enlisted, went back to college in the same career field, came back as an officer, and then continued to work their way up. I could give you 3 names off the top of my head of people who've done that. started off enlisted, left the military as an officer. And along that path, they have done the hands-on, get your hands greasy, dirty, muddy kind of work, and they've done the executive kind of work. I also know, personally, handfuls of people who went from high school straight to college or ROTC or the academy, and then went right into executive leadership in the military as an officer. And so they've never had to get their hands dirty. They know how the job results should look, but how to actually make it happen, that's a different thing. There are a lot of people in the corporate world, in the coaching world, in the executive world, who have a similar path problem. It's not always a problem, but it does present some challenges. When you've never actually done the hands-on work, you only see what it looks like when it works well, and when it works disastrously bad. And so the two outcomes you can compare as an executive and go, that is not what we were shooting for. And that is not that's not the outcome we wanted. But what needs to change to make the difference? It's not in the textbook. They didn't write that in the MBA program. Nobody knew that was how it was going to work. That's what science and innovation and effort and trial and error and failing over and over and starting again, all of that, which is where entrepreneurs become very, very powerful. Because most entrepreneurs that run a company of substance, of significance, when we ran our little company with 50 employees, contractors, all of them were contractors, no W-2. When we ran that team of 50, we started off doing the same thing we were expecting them to do. Every single job description, my wife and I not only read and wrote the job description and found the person that matched the skill set to be able to pull it off, we had actually done the task repeatedly for months before we wrote the job description, before we put it into the SOPs, before we put it into the franchise model. Now, we started with the franchise model, but everything they gave us, we went through it again and again. We did it. We actually put our hands in the dirt, if you will, of that job description and went, well, now I know why that doesn't work. Now I know why we fired 18 people in that role. Because it can't be done that way. It's actually 3 people's jobs. We're going to fix that. And we did. And when we got to the place where 50 people were reporting to us and we're like, okay, I need you to do this, this, and this. They're like, that can't be done. Hang on, let me show you. Let me show you how it can be done so that you'll know that it can be done. Right? That's a different kind of leadership, and that's very prominent in entrepreneurialism. It's also very prominent in someone who starts in the working class and works their way to the executive role. They didn't come by education. They didn't come by way of family inheritance. They didn't come because somebody was like, I like you, I want you on my team. That does happen a lot as well. Relations and nepotism, right? But when you've got somebody who starts at the bottom and does every single task all the way to the top, they have a different level of understanding, and the job description generally doesn't cover that. So what does all this have to do with StoryPower and storytelling? Well, as I was working with this particular client, they pointed out that one of the things they do is help people see when a process is broken, when a procedure that's been outlined, usually by people in the policy-making department, says we should do it this way because that will save us money, save us time, it's easier to execute, et cetera, et cetera. But those people, those policy writers, those procedure inventors, those SOP creators have never actually done the job. And so what you end up with is a checklist. And you walk around on the floor and you check off the things on the checklist. And then you realize none of this data, nothing on this checklist, nothing in this survey, nothing in this report actually tells you the truth of what's happening. And if I just check all these boxes, the people upstairs are very happy because the report is complete and it looks like I've done my job. But if I simply skip this one thing, if I leave this one checkbox blank, they lose their hair. And me checking or not checking that box has zero impact on the daily operations of whether or not it functions. In fact, there are boxes on here that I can check without even getting out of my chair. I don't have to actually look at anything to know that these boxes can be checked. I could dismiss them and write them off that easily. But there are 3 boxes that are not on this list that if I don't check those three things every single day, we have a disaster. Let me give you an example from my own life experience. As a firefighter, I worked at 3 different bases where training pilots was part of the role. And on one of those bases, as a firefighter, because there was nobody else on the base, it was just, all they did was touch and goes. Terry County in West Texas, back in the day when Reese Airplane Patch existed. And there were times that a pilot would come in and they're like, we need to park this one, or we need to have some maintenance done on this one, and it's not going to make it all the way back to base. We're going to land it here, park it here. Shuttle's coming to get us. And they would roll up and park that aircraft. And one of the things that I was obligated to do as a firefighter on the ground is watch them roll in, taxi them into their parking space. I had to know how to, I was a firefighter, but I had to know how to taxi an aircraft. I would taxi them in, and then I would put the pin in the nose gear. And putting the pin in the nose gear, and then putting the cotter pin on the other side, and then making sure the little red flag was on there so that in the wind from a distance you could tell that landing gear was locked. Why? Because from a distance, the wind in West Texas will blow that aircraft around, and if that landing gear is not locked, it will blow it far enough that the knee on the landing gear will actually fold, just like it's going up in the airplane when it's in the sky. Which means a multi-million-dollar aircraft crashes to the ground over a $2 pin. It's just a $2 pin. But see, that's one of those checkbox things that if you didn't put the check in the box and said, oh, yeah, we did it, we just forgot, that could be a $1 million uh-oh. What does storytelling have to do with executive leadership? Look, there's one thing that says I've got the title, I've got the label, I'm a CISO, I'm a CTO, I'm a CIO. And there's something else that says not only do I know what check boxes need to be ticked and which ones we can probably just erase because nobody cares, they have no impact. It was just somebody going, ooh, we should know this. And which ones are critical failures. See, the power of story power and storytelling when it's implemented in executive leadership isn't about showing off your greatest credentials necessarily. It's not about being able to pad your resume. It is about being able to demonstrate in a quick story, like the landing gear. That one pin is $1 million plus decision. If you don't remove it when the aircraft takes off from the taxi, he can't fold up his landing gear, which means his plane flies different, which means he could destroy the landing gear and not be able to land at all when it's time to come back down. If you don't lock it when he does land, it makes leaving that aircraft sitting on the runway in the wind vulnerable. If you don't put those little flags in the pitot tube, if you don't cover those things up, you create a lot of problems. They're $5 and $10 attachments that go on the airplane, but if you don't do them, they're $1 million life-risking mistakes. It's more than the checklist. It's more than the job description. It's more than the resume. But see, being able to tell the story that I understand this small detail, and this is why you don't wake up the boss in the middle of the night to ask a question. When you know to do the right thing, you just do the right thing. You know whose job description that's on? Nobody's. You know whose responsibility that is? Everybody's. And the power of story power is to be able to demonstrate in a story that I have the competence, the understanding, the experience, and the expertise that my job description will never tell you that I have. I have the ability to do what you need done because I understand what you need done, maybe better than your current SOPs do. In fact, that's what I'm a specialist at, looking at your SOPs to figure out what you have missing. That's what storytelling is about. That's what story power is about. How do you craft the stories to demonstrate your expertise so that people know more than your resume or your job title tells them? Now, if you've been curious as a consultant or an entrepreneur how to convey to people everything that you're capable of because the resume just doesn't cut it, you need to join the Story Power class. There's one called the 6 Weeks to Boost Your Story Power. Boost your business through story power. This will change the way you think and communicate about what's important to you and your client. I'm going to challenge you to get involved in that. And if you're curious about your brand and how to manage the attitude in your existing team, there's a 6-week course for that as well. It's called Attitude Hack. It starts in just a couple of weeks. You're going to want to get in on that one too. You're going to learn that just the right words can change everything. In fact, the right phrase is very much like that pin in the landing gear. The power of the metaphor can change your life. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. There is a retreat coming up that I want you to know about. It's called the StoryPower Academy Retreat. This StoryPower Retreat is about focusing on your communication skills, taking them to the next level. Discover, develop, draft, deploy, and deliver some of the best stories you've ever learned. You're going to listen, create, connect, relax, and reflect around this beautiful lake scene in Granbury, Texas. It's a chance to rejuvenate and refresh and start over with some of the best training you can possibly imagine around storytelling, leadership, and communication. Join us. Get away.
Subscribe now for access to our extensive media library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. Begin your personal growth plan at StoryPower Academy.